Hey, I'm Paul Monahan, and welcome to the Most Important Game podcast. In today's episode, I sit with Tom Athenour, and Tom is a good friend of mine, and he's a leadership expert and consultant, works out of the Dallas, Texas area. And Tom has an amazing perspective on what it takes for leaders to perform at their best. He's working in this space all the time. And one of the reasons why I wanted to spend this session talking with Tom is that I want you to hear the language that he uses around high performance and what it takes to sort of perform at your best. He talks about reactive behavior and the difference between control and agency and all of the cool things that we can take into any of the performance domains that we're working and playing in. So without further ado, let's start our conversation with Tom. Here we go. All right, Tom Athenour, great to see you, buddy. How are you?
Hey, good, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Great to see you. Hey, I want to start our conversation today and just want you to talk a little bit about how did you get in this space of leadership development, helping your clients to lead better, and talk a little bit about some of the things that you like to do and the projects you like to work on with your clients.
Yeah, no, that's great. I went a little bit of a roundabout way because I came through, a lot of people in this space will come through HR, they'll come through some sort of development. I came through financial services. That's where I started out early on years ago. And I always found this fascination with these consultants that we used to hire when I was with a big bank out in Northern California and then ultimately went into the security side. But I was always intrigued by these consultants that would come in and do sort of an organizational assessment. So I focused in on that in my graduate studies and just continued to be curious about it. And so in 1994, I was hired by a large training and development company in their marketing group. And I did a lot of sales training, and that's where I learned the business. And then we started StarQuest back in 1998, and we've been doing a lot of leadership development work ever since. So kind of a roundabout way.
That's great. Always great to talk to another sales guy, another person that came from a sales environment. So
yeah, you bet.
That's cool. That's great. What as you think about some of the work you do, and you and I had some great conversations. I've always appreciated a chance to chat. I want to talk a little bit about this idea, and you and I have talked a little bit about this before, but this idea that human performance, the foundations of human performance are very similar across many domains. And one of the things I thought we'd explore today is how do we kind of visit with a guy like you who spends time inside organizations where people show up and they do really well some days, and they show up and they struggle other days. Like, I'd love to get a kind of a glimpse into some of that work you do and what you see. And so maybe the first question would be, as you think about your work with leaders, like, what would be some of the qualities that you see on a regular basis that exemplifies like great leadership and great performance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that I've always been interested in why I was really excited to connect up with you is because you're in the sports arena and the psychology side of that, and we play in the organizational space, but there's some commonality between the two, whatever domain in which you play. There's some core psychology and core sort of human development aspects of the work that we do, regardless of what space that we're in. But what we see, to your question around leaders, I think that what we're seeing out there right now is in the organizations we're working with is there's a huge demand. There's organizations, there's a lot of tired people out there is what we're seeing. And as a result of that, because of all the complexity and the uncertainty and the constraints that leaders are facing, both mid and senior executive levels, how the question keeps coming up is how do we become more effective leaders in light of all the things that are happening that potentially can drive us to more of those reactive tendencies. We call them reactive behaviors that get in the way of being as effective as you can to lead yourself, lead your teams, and ultimately lead organizations. And so there's a lot of pressure around that right now that we're seeing as leaders are struggling with that.
What happens when people are tired?
Well, I think what happens is we go back to our default mode. And if you look at the neuroscience, it's the default mode network. I mean, you can go into the neuroscience part of it, but you get back
Let's
into
do that. Yeah, absolutely.
That subconscious way of showing up, and you're not even remotely aware of how you're affecting others, how you're affecting your interactions, how you're affecting yourselves. You just get it back into some of those old behavioral patterns, which have been built up over years. And that's what happens. That's when you're most susceptible to falling back into old ways, and you just kind of go with the flow or whatever it is, or you clamp down. We're seeing a lot of clamping down today, where under pressure, leaders will hold it hard and tight, and it's a controlling reaction out of fear of losing control, or they'll go into more of a passive complying mode. And we're seeing those sort of reactive behaviors showing up when you get into that subconscious state of just operating.
So that's fascinating, right? So I have this notion that it's primal, right? Like
yes.
When we get into situations where our brain almost says, hey, you gotta do some things just to survive.
That is absolutely correct. Well said. Because those reactive tendencies are survival mechanisms, and they've been built over the years. That's why you have to look at biography and the narrative side of the history with our leaders to give you insight as to where some of those patterns and those behaviors have shown up.
Okay.
That's why that story is really important as we work with leaders to understand where they came from and how that's formed who they are today and how they're showing up.
So you talk about story. Say more about that. I think it's a fascinating concept to help people understand like where their behaviors actually come from, how they think about different situations as reality moves towards them.
Well, I think that it just as you have story, I have story, we all have stories based upon early stage development and how you learn to navigate family systems, how you navigated a variety of different situations that you've been in. And I think that as experts and coaches within the leadership space, we've got to be able to go back and take a look at that and help people understand where some of those patterns and survival mechanisms came about before they can actually be truly more aware of those and how they may be limiting themselves. And then it's the call to, challenging people to believe that they do have agency to change some of those patterns based upon where they want to go. So, story to me is biography. It's both psychology, it's external environments that we all grew up in, and where some of those personality traits, attributes were formed, some innate and some nurtured. So that's how I think of it.
That's great. How do you think? How would you help somebody understand the impact of their story and what to do with that story if it's not serving them?
I think that people have to get to a point, we certainly see this of I think you get to a point where it just no longer serves you in where you're wanting to go. And for many people, it's deeply personal. It could be some sort of a external situation that happens, or a physical or health, or something that manifests itself that says, it's almost like a wake-up call that says, this is no longer working, and I'm tired of this, and I'm ready for change. I think you have to get to that point before you could start unpacking really what's underneath the waterline or underneath the hood, and going a little bit deeper on the emotional side and really understanding more about yourself and how you came to be who you are today and where do you want to go from a future state.
So is a little bit about this idea that when confronted with things that maybe are unexpected or super challenging, right? They go back to a default story that allows them to interpret, say, what's happening, right? And they measure reality against their story about what should be happening. And if there's alignment, then we're all good, right? My story about what should be happening aligns with reality. Everybody's happy.
Yeah.
But when there's misalignment, that's where I think this this reactive behavior that you talk about, like I would say it's mental game interference. Is that reactive behavior kind of what happens when there's a misalignment between reality and their story about what should be happening? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a really good way to frame it up. Let me just give you an example. I've become and I'm not a therapist. I'm an executive coach, but therapy and coaching are two different domains. I think that there's huge value to having both, but they are separate expertise. But I've found the value to be in the counseling side of really understanding some of those deep connections and sort of how you were created and sort of where you are today and where some of that personality traits and attributes came from, to then be able to say, okay, so here's where I've come from, and yet that's no longer working to me. I understand it. It makes sense. And then being able to embrace it to move forward. And it might be, I don't know that I'm answering your question, but for me, I'll just say for me, I've struggled with migraines. And I've now learned that a migraine from a physical perspective is a really incredible indicator that says something's off. So rather than fighting the migraine, I'll step back from it and say, what's out of alignment, to use your term, based upon where I want to go, or what I need to address or how I need to show up. And that's hugely informative to me to say, okay, it's time for a wake up, back off, become more aware, more conscious, and then we can start to make changes going forward.
I love that. What would be an example of a leader or a teammate, somebody sort of stepping into a chaotic situation and handling it really well versus not handling it well at all?
I think that what the work that we do, we work both on the individual development, leadership development space. We work, and then how does that individual leader show up within teams? And then how do they ultimately bring weather patterns to their organizations? Because leaders do bring the weather, culture, what they tolerate, what they don't tolerate, all that sort of thing. I think your question around leaders that go into that, they've got to be we start with self-awareness. They've got to really be aware of what's going on within, and then being able to then say, okay, so this is what I want to work on going forward, and start to make some of those changes. Now, it seems very... We are big fans of immunity to change. So Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy's work out of Harvard around kind of looking at assumptions and beliefs and how they get in the way of you doing what it is that you really want to do, but for whatever reason, you go back to that subconscious state and you just keep doing the same things over and over again. That's why they call it immunity to change. You've got to be able to look at that and then say, okay, so how do I start to challenge some of these assumptions, beliefs that have been keeping me small or keeping me safe or keeping me not moving forward? And so we spend a lot of our time in that space with the leaders we work with.
Okay, that is super fascinating. You know, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of mastery and the path toward mastery, and this idea that, like in the game of golf, for example, golfers want to get better. It's just everybody who plays golf, whatever they shoot today, they want to shoot 2 strokes better tomorrow. It's the way it is, right? And the disconnect comes when they have that desire, but they either don't know how to affect change, or to your point, they get stuck in default patterns and default thought patterns, and they just never do quite the right things to actually change and develop.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about when you do this work, this immunity to change work with leaders?
Yeah, we do get stuck in old patterns. And for many people, it sounds very logically, well, just change that, stop it. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It requires willpower, which is a finite resource. And so you've got to be able to go deeper on that and say, okay, so what's really driving the behavior? That's why personality is such an interesting area to integrate into the work that we do, because it's not just about what you're doing and the behaviors. You got to look at the psychology behind that, and then what is really driving that. Those, in our case, we call them reactive behaviors that are no longer serving you. But those reactive tendencies, Paul, they work. They got us to where we are, and so there's just it's a really interesting way to think about it. They work, and that's let's just take the example of controlling, where high drive, high perfectionism, where your identity is so tied into those controlling behaviors that have really worked well. I mean, you're the rock star. You produce results. You achieve a lot. The feedback loops are tremendous in organizations. Hey, great job, Paul. You're doing an awesome job. But when you get so addicted to that, and it's no longer serving you based upon where you want to go, that's when it becomes problematic and self-limiting. And so you got to go a little bit deeper.
So it becomes this thing where, like, tell me if I've got this right. We can claw our way and struggle our way to a certain level of success. And one way would be control and rely on default thought patterns that we've shaped over time. But it's hard. It's very difficult, and there's collateral damage for us personally and for the people around us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But we can actually, and I think the key here would be, there's another way, and the other way is to really examine and be aware of how those thought patterns and the default patterns are serving you, and how and when they are not serving you.
Yes.
And how to move past, to elevate your skill set as a leader in that performance. Right? Am I close?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating?
It's a very different way of showing up. You asked the question a little while ago about what sort of leaders are doing. I think you asked the question about which ones are the ones that are dealing with all this stuff well out there. Did you ask something along those lines?
Yeah, I'm always curious about, all right, what's the best example of, in any performance domain, like, can we find the people who are really succeeding and figure out, well, what's their success formula? What are they doing? Yes. How are they thinking? What qualities are they bringing that we can identify? And if we can unpack that and begin to understand that, then we have some sense for what could be options for us.
Yes. Yeah. I think a couple of them come to mind where they've been able to affect profound change and achieve results that were really remarkable. Not only from the standpoint of actual tangible results and accomplishments, but creating sustainable systems. It's a combination of both people and task, right? It's about getting stuff done, the results, but it's also about really developing team. And I think a couple of things come to mind. They're very clear on what they're trying to create. Because what has worked in the past is no longer working, or it has been oppressive, or it has been limiting innovation, or it has been truly getting in the way of full capability. Alyssa Liu, I mean, just let me give you an example with her, just in the Olympics, the gold medalist, figure skating. She's a really an incredible representation of what it could look like when you start to seek freedom, where you're not so dependent upon what everybody else is expecting of you. It's almost like you break rules a bit and start to flourish, and you seek that. What does that freedom and that open space look like? And it's almost like things fall away to be able to perform at a higher level. You've got to see that in the golf. I mean, you have certain technical skills, but what differentiates those top masters, those high performing? I think there's got to be an unleashing of some of those constraints that keep you constrained is the best way to think about it. You've got to see that in the work that you do.
Oh, 100%. I think that there's a number of paradigms that people have about what they quote unquote should be doing. Sometimes they stop thinking independently. Like I read something in this, Elisa Liu, great example. I read something last night, and you may have seen this, where I didn't realize this. I didn't realize this was part of her story, her biography, that she actually stopped skating for a little while.
Yes,
she kind
I
of
heard that. Yeah.
got off the bus metaphorically. And she's like, I got to get off this. I got to stop this for a moment. So she did. And then she came back refreshed and renewed. And like this, I think that's a great example of how to use the on-off switch. And a lot of people in performance domains, and a lot of the golfers, for example, that I work with, the switch is always on.
Yes.
And it's just not sustainable.
Yes.
And they have to be, in my experience, it's a little bit better for them and their skill development when they can take strategic pauses and leave the space for a while.
Yes.
And go do something else and put their mind somewhere, right? So
yes,
that's what you're talking about, right?
It's totally what I'm talking about. And and in Alyssa's case of really came back with a total different frame, a totally different way of looking at the sport. And it came across in her performance that she loves what she does. She loves the process. She loves the actual skating as opposed to just being focused on the end game. And so of the gold or whatever it is. And there's just a certain lightness that comes with that. You ask the question, we see what really differentiates those leaders out there. They have similar sort of ways of looking at it. One in particular, he loves leadership. He loves the challenge. He loves creating challenging old beliefs. He loves really challenging the organization to up the game. And it's like this spirit of abundance or innovation or freedom that is, they still got to hit their results and they're exceptionally effective at that, but there's a lightness coming to the skating. The skating, he loves what he does. He loves the business. And I think that's a huge aspect of it. And that's contagious, right?
That's a good point.
Did that answer your question? I want to make sure I answer your question.
Yeah, well, it absolutely does. Because I'm really trying to, I think what I heard you say was that the best leaders, they or the people who perform at the best are willing to change paradigms. They're willing to sort of shake things up a little bit, to think differently.
Yeah.
And like in Elisa Liu's case, stopping the bus metaphorically, that's different. That's a different kind of thinking. Everybody else in the figure skating space was like, no, you have to be on the ice every day. That's what builds these muscles. And she's like, guess what? I'm going to do a different thing.
Yeah.
Right. And just being willing to do that, I think is like, all right, being willing to think differently and challenge conventional thought. Like, I think that's in and of itself can be a powerful way to approach any performance domain.
Yes. Right. Right.
Yeah, that's super cool. How do the best leaders move successfully through challenges?
I think they have a healthy level of optimism. They believe that they can affect and create, or at least certainly have a fair amount of influence on creating what it is that they need to create to be able to navigate through challenges. I think that, optimism is a really powerful emotion. I love Simon Sinek's work around, the whole optimism space in which he operates with his writings and podcasting and stuff. So I listen to a lot of that because I think that so much of that mindset can be shaped if you're bringing an optimistic that, hey, yes, we can do this. We can accomplish this. We are fully capable. Let's bring our best game. I think that as opposed to falling back into cultural restrictions or we can't do this or we can't do that, it's that scarcity mindset. And so I think that's one thing that they hold. And I think that they also, too, bring a lot of courage. I have seen this time and time again because certainly in organizations, and if you look at that as a system, systems don't like disruption. They want to go back to homeostasis. They want to go back to kind of the stable environment. So any leader that takes on a shift or a change, they have to have a good level of courage and a belief that where you're moving to is going to be better than where it is today. But it takes a lot of courage, and they take bullets and arrows in the back, and that's just part of, courage. If you look at that, I think corazon, it means heart. I truly believe it's not just a head game, it's a heart game, that they truly believe and they bring that courage to challenging systems and how things get done. And I think that's a big differentiator. So
I love that. There's so much going on here as I'm thinking about the golf space, Tom. I love this language. It's so fun, by the way, to hear a different language applied to really the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's so, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this, is because I think anybody listening to this who, for example, might be in the golf space and, one of my golf clients, for example, they're going to love this because it's a different way to see the same thing. And I always think that whenever, at least from my experience, if I study something that's in a slightly different area, light bulbs can go off for me, and I think my learning gets a little bit deeper. So this is cool.
Yeah.
So for leaders to move successfully through challenge, I heard you say mission, stay focused on the mission, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Very clear.
Stay optimistic, stay in possibility thinking, stay connected to the vision so that you can help others see that the future can be brighter than it is right now.
Yes.
And then be courageous.
And be courageous. And I would add another one on there from the people side of believing in the people within your organization that we're probably on a good day utilizing about 60% of their talents and their gifts. Of how do you tap into that additional capabilities of your management, leadership teams, people within the organization. I think and I'm very passionate about this. This is why I love this business that I'm in, is that there's huge upside, but we got to figure out how to tap into that. We see quiet quitting go on the uptick. If you look at engagement, we've had some slippage on that. People are tired. And so it's like, I'm just going to keep my job now that the job market's a little tighter. I'll just kind of stay underneath the radar. I think that's a tragedy that could be addressed through good leadership. So I think that people element, you got to really understand the potential of people and bring that forth.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you're saying too is like the leader they have to start here, and they've got to get their own self-management really good so that they can show up for others, right?
Yes, Absolutely.
Because the game in leadership is just that, showing up for others to inspire and influence in productive ways.
Yes, that's correct.
And I think I heard you also say it's really about doing the things so that others show up completely and fully engaged in the mission.
Yeah.
Quick story. What came up for me as you said that, funny story. There was in a former life, I was making a call at the Home Depot headquarters. This goes back maybe 25 years or so. It's a while back. And one of the buyers that was our buyer, he was this kind of a classic old school buyer, and he always had like the funny sayings, and he would just the funny quips and so forth. It was the first time I had been to the Home Depot headquarters in Atlanta, and there's a huge number of people that work in this building, and so I was like, "Hey, how many people work in this building?" And without skipping a beat, you know what he said? About half. Freaking love that.
Half
right?
of the actual full-time equivalent.
Yeah.
It's basically what he's saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other story I guess I'd share too, and maybe you and I talked about this, but I was at a conference a couple years ago, and it was about 2,000 people at this conference, and they at one point they actually live via satellite, they brought in a speaker.
Yeah.
And it was James Cameron, the famous movie director.
Yeah.
Right. And he was actually in New Zealand, and he was finishing the editing, I think, on Avatar 3 at the time. This is maybe 2 years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think Avatar 3 is out now. But at any rate, so he kind of talks a little bit about creativity and right, how as artists, how do we manage through the challenges of creativity and so forth. And then it was like, okay, time for Q&A. Anybody got a question, right? Well, there was a guy, one of the convention folks, he was standing right next to me with a microphone, right? So I'm like, all right, I'll ask a question. So I stood up and I asked him a question, and I'm like, hey, how can you, I'm sure that there's been times when it feels really dark, when the struggle is real, and you're trying to figure something out that seems impossible. How do you get your teams to move toward completing the mission when it seems really dark, you know? And he basically said, so then he said, hey, can I tell you a story? And I said, sure, James, tell me a story. So
yeah.
He does, and he tells about the first Avatar movie, where they get everybody out to New Zealand. They got like 300 people out there, and they start shooting. And within 3 days, they figure out that one of the technologies that they had invented for the movie, basically this like headset-based video cameras and so forth, it wasn't working. And without it, they were sunk. They were done. So they had to call a timeout, and basically they had to send a bunch of people home. They're like, oh man, you know. So he gets the entire leadership team in the room, the entire leadership team of the project. He gets them all in the same room, and he basically says, hey, this team is unbelievably talented. We're gonna figure this out. We absolutely can come up with a solution, and we're gonna do it today. I believe in you. I believe in us, and this thing's gonna get fixed.
Yes.
And he said within 2.5 hours, they had a solution. It ended up being like a software solution. They needed a couple of weeks to get it fixed, but they did it, and they were all back in shooting 2 weeks later.
Yes. Yeah.
And the point is that there's a leader who knew what his role was. He self-managed in a successful way, so that like he didn't freak out. He didn't start throwing chairs or whatever.
Right.
He said, look, he did his job. He performed his job. He performed his role at a really high level because he self-managed. I guess does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's a really great example of, in this case, this leader, James, of creating the conditions and sending the message out to it. Let's figure this out, as opposed to clamping down and trying to eradicate the problem. It's a very different way of sending a message and creating those conditions. Or let's figure out, let's get to an outcome. Let's move towards this rather than just trying to solve a problem. And it just constrains people's creativity to be able to show up in a much more open way. And he sent that message very clearly that, hey, let's figure this out. We're all capable. That is a great leadership practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times we think of that like, oh, this is what he did. And that's super important, right? Because in a leadership context, in an organizational context, what people do, that's really important. But I think, like in our conversation today, it's really about how did he show up in that moment? How did he manage the thought patterns that were driving
Yes.
Whether or not he was going to go into reactive behavior, which I love this term, or do something different?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's so his performance, if we were to grade it, we'd be like, oh yeah, it's an A plus, because he didn't get mired down in the reactive behavior.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point that, from the outside, we just observe behaviors and we say, what a great leader. And I think that I don't believe that leaders are born. I believe that leaders are created and developed. Sure, traits, attributes, all those play in, people's story, but you have a lot more agency than I think a lot of people believe. In this case, it was a lot of what we would call the inner game. It's the inner game that he's probably worked on. I don't know. I don't know whether it's American culture or whatever it is, but we like to just see the winners, and we just say, "Hey, you know what? They're just winners." But we forget what actually these winners do to build the capacity and the capabilities, and it's the inner game. I'm sure you refer to it as it's the inner game of that internal operating system, but it's also the outer game. It's the skills, the practices, the behaviors. And I think people get focused way too much. We don't give enough credit to the value of doing the inner work, because it drives the outer work.
It does. And this little baby book that I wrote called The Most Important Game, and you and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
It's really based on this premise that, and the title is a little play on words. It's a double entendre, right? The most important game. Golfers are like, oh yeah, golf is the most important game. That's not my point. My point is the most important game is the game played up here.
Yes.
It's the inside game because it informs the outside game.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in fact, that's cool. What drew me too, because people ask me all the time, do you play golf? And I go, I play golf, but I'm using that term loosely because I played golf a long time and I don't seem to be getting any better. And I get so frustrated with it. And so when we first met, I thought, wow, it is a mental game. It is a total mental game, because I don't know what it is, but that inner game has a huge effect on my outer game in the game of golf. And that's why I was so intrigued with the work that you do with athletes and golfers and other sports athletes as well. So I find the work that you do to be immensely fascinating, and how it drives performance.
And I appreciate that, but I also enjoy this chance to really talk about performance in a completely different domain, where people listening to this, people watching this, have all spent time in organizations, many of them probably as leaders. And it may not have occurred to them that the same dynamics that drive how somebody like Elisa Liu shows up to the Olympics as a figure skater, these same dynamics are at play for all of us in all of the performance domains that we show up in.
Yeah, yeah. I want to come back and add one more thing about, you asked the question around how do those leaders that really, in the work that really model great leadership in the storm? I think that is absolutely a great question. Another practice that we really it's starting to get more traction today, but I think it's very relevant given this uncertain market in which a lot of these leaders are having to navigate, and uncharted waters and all of that stuff. The concept of polarity integration is really big. Let me explain. So I think I saw Alan Mulally, former CEO of Ford. He really ran that organization and changed the culture there.
Super smart guy.
Super smart guy. Have a lot of respect for him. And I heard him at a conference talking about how I can love people, which I'd never heard a CEO use the term love people, and also drive incredible accountability and drive change. So one would think that when you're needing to disrupt and de-hire people or fire people or change teams and all of that, that's on the opposite end of the pole of love and relationship building. And yet those effective leaders in the time of tension and storms are able to say both can be true at the same time. I think it was his, I don't want to quote him, but basically his message was I can make tough changes and say to my senior and executive leaders that this is not the right place for you, and I'm going to love you on the way out. It's just a whole different way of dealing with tension and conflict that I believe that's going to be a mega skill going forward of leaders' ability to hold both to be true and look for sort of ways to integrate those polarities.
Super interesting. And certainly as you talk about this, I'm just reminded again that I'm sure we could apply this exact same principle to any performance domain where we have to face the things that are uncomfortable and are difficult. And we don't have to face them with fear. We can face them with passion, appreciation, gratitude as a
Yes.
core thought,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And then still lean into the thing that must happen.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So if you go back and if we take the whole comment about when I was talking about optimistic, well, the opposite of that is realistic or however pessimistic. I think you can be some leaders can be overly optimistic where they're seen by their constituents as tone deaf or not in touch with reality. I think there's a integration of being optimistic and a real grounded to reality that you can integrate the two. I can appreciate the struggles that you're all dealing with. It's hard. Change is hard. That's why empathy is a core skill set leaders need to have. And we also need to move forward and remain optimistic because we're fully capable of executing on this. And I think you can hold two together. Totally.
First chapter of The Most Important Game, I talk about this idea that we can do two things at once. We can say that something is hard, and just by saying that, it actually sort of makes it more clear for us that we're going to encounter some difficulty.
Yes.
The person who's overly optimistic is in for a letdown if they're not seeing the challenge ahead of them as a challenge at the level that it really is.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. We hear about all the time about that authentic way of thinking, that authentic leader. I think authentic leaders recognize that both can be true, that you can appreciate this and also know that we need to have this and that they can coexist together.
Yeah,
that's what you're kind of talking about.
Yeah, right. Because it's the Stockdale paradox, right? In the book, I talk about James Stockdale. James Stockdale. For those who don't know the story, he was the the highest ranking prisoner at the Hanoi Hilton in the Vietnam War. I think he spent like 7 years in prison. And he came out and began to tell his story. And one of the things he reflected on was this idea that the people who were overly optimistic in prison during Vietnam, the Americans, they tended not to make it through that difficult challenge. And the ones who could see reality as it was and take it as a difficult challenge, but one that they had the faith that they could get through,
Yes.
those were the ones who endured. And so it's an interesting, maybe subtle, but important distinction he makes between optimism and, overly optimism and being a realist.
Wasn't that covered in Jim Collins's Good to Great? I think that's where I first read it. And I was like going, yes, that's absolutely true. You use the term "and." I think that we work with our coaches to start using the integrative word of "and." And it's an improv skill, right? You know, improv 101 is the power of the "and." And so we can have this and also embrace true reality and the challenges. And hold both to be true. And I think it helps people see you as an authentic, realistic leader that's grounded and also caring. So I think it's exactly what Stockdale was talking about. Those that waited for Christmas to get out or whatever it was, and then the disappointment.
100%.
And then it was just devastating. So.
Yeah. Hey, I'm sure we're going to get out by Christmas. Christmas comes and goes.
Yeah.
And they get kind of crushed.
Yeah.
And I love that. And the this idea that I want to talk real quick about reflection too, because that comes up. Like, how do great leaders use reflection as a way to develop their skills and or show up better?
That's absolutely correct.
How do they do that? How do leaders in your experience use reflection as a tool?
It's the capability to be able to step back from it and marinate a little bit on what's going on, to be able to pull in sort of bigger, more creative ways to look at things, as opposed to just jumping in to try to solve the problem, address the issue. It's the ability to step back with the idea that as we step back and can look at things, start to look at things more broadly from different perspectives, that can greatly affect how we might approach whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. And so, like, we're doing a big project now with different 360s, and you're familiar with 360 assessments, right? So I was with a guy yesterday, and I said, okay, so here's the deal. You got 25 pages of feedback, and we all, I don't know whether it's negativity bias or we're always going to the things that are all wrong, it's all those things.
Of course.
Don't do anything with it. I don't want you to reject anything. I don't want you to accept anything. I want you to just sit on it for a while, for about 10 days to 2 weeks, and then we're going to reconvene. So that's your assignment. Not judging, not evaluating, not beating yourself up, not beating others up. Take a breath. And then let's kind of come back to having maybe a refreshed perspective on what are you going to do with the feedback, because it truly is a gift that these people have given you. What are you going to do with it? That's reflection. You've got to have that going on in your athletes that you work with.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the pause, the taking of the breath, the time to assess what went well, where are the opportunities to grow, develop, improve, and then maybe reset a mission, maybe even redefine what winning looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge.
And when you're in that reactive state, kind of below the line, your definition of winning is most likely going to look extremely different than when you're operating above that line, kind of that creative space that's more open And I think that happens a lot, where people redefine what the end game is or what the mission is or what we're trying to accomplish, big picture. And you can accomplish that through good reflection. So,
yeah, so good. Tom, this has been great. I really appreciate the chance to do this.
Oh my gosh, this is great.
I love the parallels. And I know, like, for my client group, so many of them can absolutely understand what you're talking about, because they all spent time in organizations. They all spent time either as leaders, as business owners, or teammates wanting to engage. I mean, there's just so much here. I really love it.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure, Paul. It's absolutely fun to talk through this and share different ideas and perspectives, and look for the integration and kind of the intersections of the stuff that you're doing and the stuff that we're doing. And it's just quite fascinating how there is so much similarity when you get right down to the inner games and the core and what really differentiates successful leaders and not. So it's been fun. It's been a blast.
Yeah, appreciate the exchange. Good stuff.
Thank you for the invite.
We'll talk soon.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom. All right, super fun to talk with Tom Athenour. One of the big takeaways for me is how Tom talks about story. We hold on to this story, this idea that's a part of every bit of our experience since we were little. And we use it, and it shapes how we see reality as we move through it. That's kind of how I would explain it. And letting go or loosening our grip on our story is something I talk about on a regular basis. That's one of the keys to actually being less reactive and being in situations where we can see things more objectively. Super cool stuff. I hope you enjoyed this. My guess is that anybody listening to this or seeing this, you've been in an organizational space at some point, and you understand all of the things that Tom was talking about. In whatever performance domain you're trying to excel in right now, all of these ideas and concepts are perfect metaphors, they're perfect corollaries. And I think that you can take any of these into your domain and use it to actually develop your own skill set and your own mental game, if you will, your own inside game. So super cool stuff. Want to thank you, Tom, for doing that. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit the like button and or follow or subscribe. Also, if you want to learn more about the work that I do, you can follow me or check out the work that I do at paulmonahan.com. I want to thank Kevin Monahan for all the work behind the scenes in producing this podcast. And last but not least, remember to stay in the game. It's absolutely possible for you to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more. See you soon.